Okay, so to finish this week, you've saved me the best till last. We've got Nedum Onuoha, the former Man City, Sunderland, QPR and Real Salt Lake defender, who's our new columnist on ESPN FC. Obviously, you've seen Pete Nedum before as a pundit on the show, but he's joining us this week to talk about his new column, which is about player criticism, about when players are criticised by fans, by media, by ex-players. So, Nedum, talk me through the column.
Okay. So the column itself is one which came in recent weeks with the likes of Bruno Fernandes, for example, being asked to comment on what, say, Roy Keane has been saying about him, and not just in one particular week. We're talking about longer periods of time. But that also then extends out to, say, the likes of, say, a Harry Maguire, a Phil Jones, some of these players that receive critiques on a national level. And in reality, the industry, in terms of how players are supposed to receive it and what is right, what is fair, and what is too much. Because in reality, there's so many different perspectives. And in the article itself, and firstly, it's a pleasure to be on board with you guys, now one of you allegedly. But it's the different perspectives because there's a lot more than we see. Because I think at times, if it's about Fernandes or so on, we just think about Bruno Fernandes. But what about like their families? What about their friends? What about people who care about them? Because for Bruno Fernandes, you could say it doesn't matter because he's in control of it. But for all those other people in your orbit, I think there's a real discussion to be had about like, say, the value of certain critiques. And I don't know if you guys would agree with this to start with, but I think the critiques and stuff that we see, do you believe that like certain critiques carry more weight depending on who's saying it?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, obviously, if Roy Keane is criticising the captain of Man United, it carries a lot of weight because Roy Keane is probably regarded as one of United's top 3 greatest ever captains in terms of what he's won and his influence. So if Roy Keane is criticising the current Man United captain, then that carries a lot of weight. But if myself or Rob was saying it, it'd carry less weight because we don't have the track record of Roy Keane. But I take your point. But I think, you're in the media as well now. So do you feel that you have to temper your criticism sometimes because of what you know goes on in the dressing room in the sense of criticising somebody?
I think that's a good question. And I'll hold my hands up. From my perspective, I'm somebody who had a long career, good career. But there's so many times where, say, if you criticise somebody who's perceived to have done more than you in their career, then you immediately dismiss your opinion. That's one side. But then the other side, I don't like to say anything that I wouldn't say to the person themselves. I think there's a standard within football where the players who are playing are very good at football. And I think sometimes some people are quick to draw the line between, say, whether somebody's out of form, whether somebody's no good. And I think when I mentioned the Roy Keane factor there, like, firstly, for anyone who's lived through it, like, Rob, how do you think Roy Keane would have dealt with criticism on this scale from if he was playing in this era now? Like, would he be, okay, yeah, no problem, I'm going to try and impress whoever? Or do you think he'd be a bit more on the front foot?
But I think that is, and that is part of the problem, isn't it? That you often hear Man United players, Man United managers in particular, talking about how tough it is to deal with the criticism of former players because they're all talking from a point where they won everything in their career. So there's nothing that you can necessarily... What can Bruno Fernandes bite back at Roy Keane? Roy Keane is, you mentioned there in your column, that he's probably the most successful captain in Man United's history. Now, Bruno Fernandes is doing the job in the best way that he possibly can. He's trying to be a leader in the way that he knows how. But he can't bite back in the way to Roy Keane because Roy Keane essentially is talking down to him is the wrong word, but talking down to him in terms of career. Whereas who could have done that to Roy Keane when he was captain of Man United? No, Brian Robson was a wonderful captain at Man United, but he didn't win half the things. Wasn't as half as successful as Roy Keane was at Man United. So immediately, for someone like Bruno Fernandes, I feel that you're on the back foot. And actually, I've got to say at this point, I think that Bruno Fernandes has handled this all wonderfully because he's been asked about it in a mix zone after one of the games. He's also been asked about it, you mentioned in your column, live on TV. I think it'd be very, very easy for players like Bruno to want to bite back and make it a bigger issue than it perhaps is. But I think he's handled it really, really well to the point where a lot of fans now are looking at it and thinking, well, actually, we don't want to go against Roy Keane because of what he did for the football club, but I actually don't think he's got this right. I don't think he's got that criticism right.
I think Bruno Fernandes actually has really grown as a player and as a person in the last 6 months. But I think, like you say, Rob, his reaction to the criticism from Roy Keane has been to go out and do it on the pitch even more than he has been doing. So he's really stepped up. And I think, I think we've all been critical of Bruno Fernandes in the past, and me definitely. But I think this season he has really stepped up, and he has been the one player at Man United that has carried the flag this season. But just on that, Nedum, Bruno has kind of reacted in a positive sense. Mental strength, character, defiance. I suppose what your point is that if if a player is getting criticised and it's affecting his family or himself or herself, then they could go the other way and retreat to their shell and lose their form. So the players can handle it in different ways.
Yeah, for sure. And to be the captain of Manchester United is one of the most significant captaincies in world football. You know, the amount of scrutiny that they face, not least of all because for the size of the club, the relative lack of success over the last 10, 15 years means the criticism is very, very stark. You know, it's very strong at times. And for other people, like, it is tough because the example that I gave within the column is, say, when you're going to a stadium to play in your games, you can take friends and family with you. And all of a sudden, when they're in the stands, the stuff that they're hearing, you know, they can't argue with everyone. Like, people know, the people that know you know what you're about, know about your intent. This is managers, this is teammates, this is friends, this is family. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody that's watching you is educated in that same way. And this goes, again, to not necessarily push back against Roy Keane, because Roy Keane has always been opinionated. You know, he's got a very strong stance. He knows what he believes in. He'll praise things that he likes. He'll really dismiss things that he doesn't. But in reality, like, does he know what Bruno Fernandes is doing as a captain for the football club? Probably not. Does his version of what a captain should do vary compared to what other people are doing at this moment? Probably. But because Roy Keane has said it, I think the audience then says that they can think it and they can be it themselves. And that's what I'm sort of like reluctant to sort of buy into. And I think as well for you guys, like, especially if you out there, you mentioned Bruno Fernandes, like, he's received a ton of critique across the last few years, but you can change your opinion of it because you're seeing it for what it is. I think a lot of former professionals, they don't.
Well,
I think they stick by it.
As a player, I'm trying to think of many examples when you were playing because you might have some, but if a certain player continues to criticise, and Roy Keane does it a lot, does it become a kind of a parody? Look, he had a great career, but you're thinking, God, he's off again, you know? What?
Yeah.
The players that actually dish out praise as well as criticism are the ones that you take more attention of because they are prepared to go both ways.
I don't know. I think with Roy Keane, we keep mentioning him, and there are a few other people. Like, the thing that draws the biggest audience sometimes, in my opinion, in Premier League TV is the Man United Inquisition after they lost a game of football. Because all of a sudden, the key figures will now start complaining about the key people they think are responsible for the downfall of the football club in any particular game or any particular moment. And in reality, this is just like Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5 of saying the same thing. But there's a lot more nuance and stuff that comes into it. But I don't think it ends up being a parody because the team, relatively speaking, is not being that successful. And I think, as I say, the critique that some people can get, especially on that national TV level, because of that seat on TV, especially in the UK, is massive because it's one of the few times where a football community comes together to watch something in unison. So what he said then carries the most weight because the active audience is there. And so many things come from that. Like, there are times when there'll be a game on Saturday morning, and then come like Monday afternoon, we're analysing what Roy Keane has said about this team. Like, that's the discussion for the rest of the week. And, you know, it is what it is. And when some people are naturally like, well, you know, we have our biases as such, we all do. But I think, again, the critique that, as a player, the critique I would receive from former players is one which used to frustrate me the most because that's the one that allows people to think they can say and to do whatever they want outside of that field. But it's the one that should be the most educated because they know the difficulty of doing the job that's going on right in front of them. So that's what disappoints me the most, I believe.
Nedum, can I just ask, you mentioned there about the impact that it has on friends and family, and I think you talk in your column a little bit about your experiences at QPR. My eyes were open to this actually on a Champions League trip, a United Champions League trip to Atlanta, where I think it was under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Harry Maguire was going through a really, really tough time. The social media backlash towards some of his performances. United weren't performing very well, so everyone was on, and fans, pundits, everyone was on them. And Harry Maguire's family were in a restaurant in Bergamo just ahead of this Champions League trip, and there were fans in there, and obviously, you know, the conversation turns to Harry Maguire and he gets quite heated. It gets to the point where Harry Maguire's family have to leave this restaurant because they just can't be there anymore. They're having an argument with fans that it's not a safe environment to be in. They have to leave. To me, that is far, far too much. And you talk about your experiences at QPR. What is it like to be in that situation? And what is the impact on friends and family when ultimately they're just coming to watch you play a game of football?
Yeah, at times I do look back and feel sorry for friends and family who will come into a difficult situation, whether that's for you as an individual or for the club as a collective. Because there were times at my time at QPR where, like, I'd say to my wife, like, don't come, don't bring the kids. You know, I'd spend the first part of my career saying, oh, let's go, it's football, it's Saturday, Sunday, let's go and do this. Because it's a great job. You know, for me, it's the best profession I could possibly have envisioned being a part of. but all of a sudden you know the sentiment, you hear the noises in the stands. But for them, they're having to hear it. So much like anger being directed towards like a collective or individuals. And when it's unjust, like it hits you deeper. And for those like friends and family, they want to stick up for you. They want to fight for you, but they can't because they're going against everybody. And when you're in that position, like with Harry Maguire not being able to just be in a his family not being able to just be in a restaurant, it goes too far. And I want to say, go on record with the piece, I'm not saying players cannot be criticised because of course they can be. They deserve to be for things which are going against the standards which they'd set at previous times. But it's very easy for things to just topple to a point where it's too far. And for when it becomes too far, it only stops after somebody has to come forward and say how much they're suffering. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're so sorry. We didn't mean to do this, didn't mean to do that, as was the case with Phil Jones. But it takes a lot, again, for a player to come out and say that they're struggling because within this whole macho world of like pro sports where everybody's watching you, if you perceive to be weak in any particular way, before you know it, like people just say that's who you are.
Can you separate the criticism from former players from criticism from supporters and criticism on? Is it all the same or is it different?
No, it's different. I think it's different because some of the stuff that like say on the if I go to a game and I listen to stuff on the terraces, some of the stuff that's said, like I know it's just not the case. It's a long way from being the case. And the influence and stuff that most people have is relative to the people who are in their orbit. So it might be people in their section within the stadium or something. It might be like in a forum somewhere. And back in the day, that's what it was. But it's more so like, say, for example, back in the day, in the early 2000s when I first started playing, like the local journalist was huge. Playing for City, the MEN was dictating a lot about who they believe was to be good, to be bad. Forums talking about all this. But if something was going the wrong way, before you know it, someone might just be banned from the training ground. Think about the power that Sir Alex Ferguson could have. Okay, this guy said this, so they're not coming in anymore. These days, you could ban all the like written media. Well, how about social media? How about the TV people? How about this? There's an element where access is at a greater level now. So the critiques and discussions can come from any angle you want. And for some, they'll say, just don't pay attention to it. Most people do not pay attention to it. And in fact, I'll give you another example. So I was the under-21s captain for a game against France, and we were playing, it was like around this time of the year, it's March time, before going to the European Championships in the summer 2009. And we'd qualified, France hadn't qualified, so they sent a bit of a younger team out to play against us. And we got battered in this game, yeah. It was like really humbling, weird, battered, yeah. And as captain, I've got to go and do the press afterwards. And as I went into the conference, a guy said to me, so Frank Lampard recently has come out and said that young players get too much too soon. What do you make of that? And like, I was like, what? It's like, what's just happened there? Because I thought I was going to be facing questions about this particular game. On that 21 side for France, that's a very talented side. Like, we didn't play to our best, but it's a talented side. So now that thing which I knew nothing about has been hand-delivered to me in the rawest of moments where I'm thinking about the game that's just happened. And the response I gave was like a fair one. Like, I don't necessarily believe that to be the case, blah, blah, blah. The next day I'm having a war of words with Frank Lampard somehow. Someone who I never would have had that with because it's someone that like is one of the icons of English football. So again,
they should have said those nasty things about it, should they?
Yeah, of course. So you could literally have no idea what's going on, but someone will deliver it to you because they want a response. And when it's time for that response, like all of a sudden you start thinking about, well, what should I say? What can I say? What can I do? And your job is affected from that point.
That is the issue right now because I know one paper and probably two that basically employ someone on a Sunday night to sit and watch the TV to basically use the Roy Keane quotes, the Jamie Carragher quotes, or whoever to turn it into a back page. And from this point on, after every Super Sunday, check what the back page is the next day. It will be Keane blasts X player or Carragher blasts X. They'll be using the quotes because they're because managers and coaches have now become and players have become so much more careful about what they say. It's unusual that you can get one of those. I mean, me and Rob have been to plenty of press conferences, and you come out thinking, "God, there's nothing there." It's all very tactical. So Roy Keane will drop a bomb or say something, and that will create the headline, which will create the Bruno Fernandes storm, which will create the issue which you've addressed and you've spoken about. I just want to ask you one thing though. I mean, you've been doing the punditry now for what, 2, 3, 4 years? Is there any player that you've since regretted criticising or anything you said that should have said that?
Criticizing.
It could be constructive, just because you've said it.
No, the most passion I felt when doing punditry actually came when United lost 3-0 to Newcastle 2 seasons ago.
Oh, sorry,
Carabao Cup. Yeah, just because, like, from a professional standpoint, like from a like a human standpoint, like I don't support United at all, like not even close. But I was standing there in that game. I was watching the game that day, and I was looking at them as professionals, and I thought this is a disgrace. And something within me was kicking in to where like this is how I'd feel if I was playing for this team right now. Like I'm looking for a reaction from these guys, and they're not doing it. And on that particular day, I was very, very tough, I think, on Dallo, because he looked like he just gave up in certain moments. Because that game itself, it's not a trap game. Newcastle fielded an 11, just about, because they had about 10 players injured at the time. They wanted the game out of the way. So for them to be winning, I think 3-0 or whatever it was at Old Trafford, I was looking at the individuals within that team and I was really frustrated. And I think that came across more so than any other time when I've been doing analysis, because overall I can be quite calm as I describe it. But I was actually like angry as I was talking. And from there, a few people have mentioned it to me about me saying this and saying that and doing this and doing that. And I don't necessarily regret it, but I think maybe there were points at which I would have missed because I was so emotional about what I'd seen in that moment. So that's the only regret that I have, because I need to be able to take a step back and really look at what's happened, as opposed to being in there as if I've just played, because obviously I hadn't.
It's because you're watching the game with me. That's why you were angry.
Oh, God, yeah. Of Mark Ogden flipping Old Trafford watching football. I mean, it's going to send you over the edge, isn't it?
How much do players read and see, do you think? Do you think it's... Because often managers say, I don't think he reads it. I don't think the players read it and see it. But do the players see more than we think, or do they see less than we think? Do they really can they shut themselves off from it?
I think certain players can shut themselves off from it, but I think it comes with getting older. Like if you are young, like social media is your home, the same way it's for every other person at that same sort of age. So like, I say like a 22, 23-year-old not being on Instagram would be really weird, for example. And the things that they like on Instagram, like if you love football, you're probably following football pages on Instagram. You're not just like following fishing channels and stuff like this. Like you are part of that football community. You're getting the jokes off and all this stuff. You're trying to enjoy your life. Maybe you're seeing some skills you like, or you're tracking another league. So when all of a sudden like that then seeps into other bits, like you're not searching for it, but you could become it. Like if you're playing in a big game, see, we're talking about the 1%ers now, but if they're playing in a big game and something bad happens to them in that big game, like they'll be talked about on all of those big platforms. And we're talking about millions of people seeing it, and now they're engaging and they know your handle. So it's at such and such a person, and they're letting you know what they think about it and so on. So they will see it. And worst case scenario, really, like their peers and their friends and so on, like even if the player doesn't see it, those are the people who are seeing it. Go on.
Going back from when I was younger doing this job, and you got training grounds to be allowed in, and it would be, you'd be pulled up, or people, your journalistic colleagues would be pulled up by a player, basically hitting it on the shoulder of the paper saying, what have you been writing? But now I imagine that it's no longer newspapers. I bet it's minimal newspapers. It's more about, like you say, it's Instagram, it's Twitter, or TikTok. It's not the players sitting in the restaurant at the training and looking at the papers. It's that's old school. But I do remember a couple of times. There's one occasion, I won't name his name, but a player, it was he made his England debut, and he wasn't very good, and somebody had written that this player had actually earned 2 England caps, his first and his last. And he read this in the paper, and I actually witnessed this player with it was like a cartoon sketch with a rolled up piece of paper, basically banging the journalist on his shoulder with his papers to say, "What are you saying this for? First game and second game, or two." But that shows that the influence papers have. But I think now it's totally different.
And to be fair, you say it's totally different, but I think it is. It depends on the audience, because some people still consume things in that manner. Some people are still gonna maybe look online to see what like a journalist is saying, or maybe someone's gonna go and see what like Fabrizio Romano's saying about whatever, like as a younger person. But I think it's very easy to enter the cycle to where like we talk about players as if they're just like characters within like some TV show, so it's not real, so you can say what you want. And the moment that becomes the case is when you realize that at the end of the day, when you do see these people, you see how it affects them and those people in their orbit.
The old chief Man United writer of the MEN tells a story about being at a game at Blackburn or somewhere and driving back down the motorway and pulling alongside the Man United team coach and seeing David Beckham on the window, banging on the windows and doing this through the window to say, "You better give me 10 out of 10 in the play ratings in the paper tomorrow morning." And this reporter was looking at him thinking, why do you care about your play rating in the Manchester Evening News? But he did care. He cared because it was important. Because they'd all talk about it in the dressing room, and he wanted 10 out of 10.
Well, hopefully there's going to be more columns to come, Nedum, that are going to be as interesting as this one. And we'll be back on talking about it in the next few weeks.